The foreclosure notice said their house had already been auctioned, and the deadline to leave was in 5 days. Harold and Denise Parker sat at their kitchen table in St. Petersburg, Florida, reading the notice line by line, checking the address repeatedly to confirm it was theirs. The document listed a completed foreclosure case, a final judgment, and a new owner, Bayline Asset Group, LLC. It stated that ownership had already transferred through a public auction and that they were now required to vacate the property. There was no mention of any mistake, no indication of review, and no option presented beyond leaving. They had no mortgage. The house had been paid off for years. There had never been a lender, never been a missed payment, and never been any communication suggesting financial trouble. Harold called the court listed on the notice and provided the case number. The clerk confirmed the case was valid, the foreclosure had been completed, and the property had been transferred through auction. The plaintiff was Bayline Asset Group, LLC. The defendants were Harold and Denise Parker. The system showed that notices had been served and that no response had been filed. They had never received any notice. They went to the county recorder's office the same day and requested all records tied to their property. The file showed a sequence that matched the court case. A mortgage had been recorded against their home 6 months earlier. The lender listed was Bayline Asset Group, LLC. The document included both of their names and signatures that resembled theirs closely enough to pass review. 3 months after that, a notice of default had been recorded, then a foreclosure filing, then a final judgment, then a transfer of ownership. Every step had been recorded correctly. That sequence gave the foreclosure legal standing. Their attorney reviewed the documents and identified the structure immediately. Someone had created a fraudulent mortgage using their identities and recorded it against their property. When no payments were made on that mortgage, the same entity initiated foreclosure and completed the process through the court system. Because all notices had been redirected, Harold and Denise never responded, allowing the case to move forward uncontested. Their house had been taken through a legal process based entirely on documents they never signed. The timeline showed the first step clearly. A change of mailing address had been submitted for their property records before the mortgage was recorded. That redirected all official notices to another location. Every document related to the mortgage and foreclosure had been sent to that address. Harold and Denise remained unaware of the process until it was finished. At the same time, someone had gathered enough of their personal information to pass identity verification. The mortgage file contained identification documents, personal details, and signatures that matched closely enough to avoid immediate rejection. The notary listed on the mortgage confirmed identity had been presented, but later admitted it had not been independently verified. The lender listed on the mortgage was not a traditional bank. It was the same LLC that later took ownership. This allowed the entire process to remain controlled within a single structure. The mortgage created the debt. The default created the violation. The foreclosure created the transfer. The process did not depend on an external lender. It depended on recorded documents. Harold and Denise's attorney filed an emergency motion to halt the eviction and challenge the foreclosure. The court granted a temporary stay, stopping the immediate removal from the property. That provided time but did not change ownership. The house remained listed under Bayline Asset Group, LLC, in public records. The legal challenge focused on proving that the mortgage was fraudulent. Without a valid mortgage, the foreclosure could not stand. The attorney gathered evidence including signature analysis, identification discrepancies, and the timeline of the mailing address change. Harold checked his credit report and saw the mortgage listed under his name, along with missed payments. The address associated with the loan was not their residence. It had been changed before the mortgage was issued and then changed back after the foreclosure was completed. This prevented any alerts or notices from reaching them. The fraud followed a structured sequence. Communication was redirected first, identity was established second, a mortgage was created third, default was allowed fourth, foreclosure was completed fifth, ownership was transferred last. Each step depended on the previous one being accepted. The investigation expanded to examine the LLC. Bayline Asset Group had been registered shortly before the mortgage was recorded. It had no operating history and no verifiable business activity. The contact information associated with it led to temporary phone numbers and email accounts that were no longer active. The mortgage funds were never used in a traditional sense. There was no actual borrowing need. The mortgage existed to create a legal basis for foreclosure. The attorney traced the mailing address change to an in-person submission at a local office. Surveillance footage showed an individual presenting identification and completing the request. That identification matched the one used in the mortgage file. This connected the actions. Authorities linked the case to a group targeting properties without existing mortgages, particularly those owned by retirees. These properties allowed fraudulent mortgages to be recorded without interference from other lenders or alerts from financial institutions. The system moved forward because each document appeared valid at the time it was submitted. The court reviewed the emergency motion and the evidence provided. The attorney demonstrated that Harold and Denise never applied for a loan, never received funds, and never signed the mortgage documents. The notary's admission regarding verification failure weakened the legitimacy of the mortgage. Without a valid mortgage, the foreclosure had no legal basis. The court ruled that the mortgage was fraudulent and void. That invalidated the foreclosure. That restored ownership. The county records were updated to remove the mortgage, cancel the foreclosure, and return the title to Harold and Denise. The eviction notice became unenforceable, and the case tied to the foreclosure was closed. They remained in their home, but the process had taken months to reverse. During that time, the system had treated the fraudulent documents as valid and had nearly removed them from a property they had owned for decades. After the case concluded, they implemented monitoring measures. They registered for property alerts, secured their personal information, and began regularly reviewing county filings related to their property. They ensured that any future changes would trigger immediate notification. The structure that allowed the fraud remained based on document submission and notarization. The foreclosure was real. The ownership transfer was recorded. The eviction was authorized. All of it had been built on a mortgage that never existed. And until it was proven false, it was enough to take their home away.